Welcome to The Impact Equation, conversations with leaders shaping a brighter future, with me, Adam Pike.
And me, Rafi Adelstein. With our special guests, we unlock the secrets of those who dare to transform our world. We talk to architects of change, pioneers in their fields, working towards a brighter future for us all. In each episode, we dig into each element of the impact equation. Today, we're joined by Josh MacAlister MP, recently elected to the seat of Whitehaven and Workington for the Labour Party. Before entering politics, Josh dedicated his career to transforming children's lives, first as a teacher on Teach First, and then founding the charity Frontline, before leading the government's independent review into the children's services sector. He's also co-founded Shift, tackling youth violence, and chaired Foundations, the What Works Centre for Children and Families. This work was awarded with an OBE in last year's New Year's Honours.
With deep experience in policy and frontline impact, we are really excited to dig into Josh's perspectives on change, leadership, and the future of social care. Josh, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
So Josh, if you wouldn't mind, take us back. Why dedicate your life and career to transforming children's lives?
Just a small question there.
Yeah, it's a big question. And I think probably links to also why I decided to go into politics with some of the same motivations. So I was very lucky growing up to have a lot of adults in my life who loved me, and I always knew that. But there was a period where my parents split up, and I went a bit off the rails at school, and life was pretty disruptive for a couple of years. And my stepdad came along, who was ex-military, and he was able to spend a lot of time with me and my brother, and me in particular, getting me back on track with learning. So even at primary school, I remember being that kid who was taken out for the Biff, Chip and Kipper books, you know, the kind of like extra catch-up lessons on writing and reading and times tables. And that feeling of like everyone, you know, like rushing ahead and you being left behind. And Peter, my stepdad, basically, we did an hour of extra homework every single night after school growing up. And I hated it at the time. But like that experience of just having that person who's there to provide that extra support, by the time that I got to secondary school and then was able to get to university, I think the older I got, the more I appreciated just how big a change that was. So that was really important.
Tell us a bit about Peter. What's he like? You know, what's his job? Like, why did he decide to do that?
So he met my mum, and my mum was working full time, had two pain in the backside boys, and we were a bit of a handful. And he was basically able to, I think he was a researcher at a university in Manchester looking at hedgehogs.
Okay.
But he'd been in the armed forces for a long time. And when he met my mum, basically agreed to spend his working time looking after the two of us and helping raise us. And my mum carried on working. She still works a lot, and she's in her mid-70s now. So she's a trooper.
What's she doing?
She's a psychotherapist. So she worked a bit in the NHS. She's now sort of edging towards retirement. She does little bits of work with some third sector organisations in Scotland and in Cumbria, and a couple of businesses as well. And then my stepdad, just like right before COVID, my stepdad had a heart attack and died totally unexpectedly.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Which was, just a real loss. I mean, it's an interesting thing about when people die. Like, did you have the chance to tell them how important they were to you before they passed? And with Peter, I did. Like, I think both me and my brother did, you know, find those opportunities to make sure he knew how big an impact he'd made on our lives. He never got to see me be an MP, but he was dead proud of me, and knew that he'd made a difference. So yeah, that's a bit about Peter.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Josh, it's so interesting to hear the people that have shaped our lives, in your life in particular in this instance. I wonder whether there are other people or perhaps mentors in your life that have shaped your path to the Palace of Westminster.
There are, yeah. There's lots. I've been very lucky to be able to work with amazing people. Another person who's worth mentioning is a guy called Philip, who was my professional coach for 10 years. So when I set up Frontline, I had a trustee who looked at this I think, I can't remember how old I was. It must have been like 26, something like that. I was setting up Frontline, which I think is where I met both of you two. I still had a young person's rail card. And this trustee was like, I think you could do with a coach. I think it'd be really useful for you. And I was like, what is this quackery? I don't think I need that. But I met this guy called Philip, who provided coaching services for Boston Consulting Group partners. He agreed to basically do pro bono coaching for me. And that relationship lasted for 10 years. And every couple of months for 10 years, I had this very special relationship with this guy who created the space to make me think quite hard and deep about what I was doing in leading Frontline and the choices I had to make, and holding me accountable for making big calls. And working with him, I mean, he was very much a coach. So like his wisdom came slowly through great questions and holding space rather than giving me the answers. But yeah, just some incredible wisdom from him that made me a better leader. And he very sadly passed away a couple of years ago as well. And I was very blessed to be asked to speak at his funeral. And the people the number of people who were there, who this guy had worked with, the kind of emotion of it was incredible. So yeah, Philip's he was a very important part of my kind of growth and some of the decisions that I made and where I am now. Lots of family members, my dad, my mum, my brother, my husband, Matt, who is a great kind of teammate on the kind of journey that we're both on career-wise. So yeah, lots of people.
So take us back to before you set up Frontline. You're a teacher. Where was the spark of inspiration for Frontline? Why did you decide that was what was needed?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I started teaching because of Teach First. So really attracted by the mission of the organisation. This idea that in the graduate recruitment market, which can be a pretty kind of despairing place, I think, for people that have been at uni and then want to go and do something where they stretch themselves and are looking for some sense of purpose. At the time, this is in the late 2000s, Teach First was the only show in town, and it was basically saying, do this extremely difficult thing and do it because we've got this huge social problem, which is the money your parents earn decides how well you do at school. And that's massively unfair. And so that was I found that really exciting. It's why I did teaching and because of Teach First. And then starting that journey with Teach First, working in this school in a bit of East Manchester, Oldham, covering an area called Failsworth and Newton Heath, which is near the Etihad Stadium in Manchester. Worked with a lot of kids who were either in care themselves or kids who had stuff going on at home that meant social services were involved. And I could see through that the gaps in children's social care, the fact that a lot of these kids didn't know who their social worker was. A lot of them described it as feeling like people came in with a clipboard and kind of went through the motions, but didn't really know about their lives. And it didn't really feel like there was a professional that had a full grip on what was going on for them and the ability to make it better. So that was motivating. And then partly because my dad had been a social worker himself. So, I'd had some conversations with him. He'd seen that I'd decided to do Teach First and was interested in why wasn't there something like that for social work. So we had a few chats. And then I wrote an article, a 500-word article in 2010, I think it was, early on in my teaching career. I had my appendix nearly burst and I ended up being rushed to hospital to have it out. And I was off work for a couple of weeks. And in that time, wrote this article, found the time to write this 500-word thing and then got it out there. And Andrew Donis, who had just finished being a government minister in what was then Labour government, and we just had the coalition government be elected, 2010. Andrew saw this piece and thought, yeah, this is a great idea. We should do something with this. And whilst I was still teaching, over the next couple of years, kind of developed the idea, got some money to do a longer piece of work on it, got it to the point where we could put it in front of Michael Gove and then persuaded him to put some initial funding in because we'd built a bit of support from a few other folk. And I think, Rafi, you were at the DFE at that time.
I was. We chatted about it, yeah. remember it well.
Amazing. So it sounds like there's a wonderful coalition there, to use the political speak, of both Labour impetus and also Conservative impetus. In fact, Adonis and Gove known to be quite not radical, but get things done.
Definitely radical.
Yeah.
And radical, which is, again, amazing for the stars to align at that moment. Josh, if you could just take us back, because you've shared with us the problem that you saw as a teacher, but at a macro level, can you give us some context on the numbers and the big structural problems, maybe even today, that we face?
Yeah, so children's social care, and for international audience members, a good way of understanding it is the kind of child welfare system as it would often be described in the US. So this is support for families where there's quite an acute crisis. So parents who might have an addiction issue, or there might be domestic abuse and there's a kid in the home. Children who are on a kind of child protection plan because there's concerns about harm, through to kids in the care system, the fostering system or living in residential homes, and then those children leaving that system. And in England, there's 500,000 children at any one time who have got children's social care support in some form or another. About 50,000 of those 500,000 are on a child protection plan. So that's the kind of acute end of real concern. And we've got over 80,000 children who are today in England growing up in the care system. So they're the numbers. And for those children in care, the outcomes for them in terms of life chances are like some of the most shocking of any group at all. And they are because of decisions that we've collectively made as a society about how to look after those kids. They are children who are in the care of the state. So, there's this real, it's not often spoken about enough, but this real contrast between the duty we have to those kids because they are being raised by the state and the appalling state of those children's life outcomes and opportunities. Happy to say a bit more about kind of why I think that is and what that says later on when we talk about the review that I did. But yeah, really poor outcomes. The system's costing a lot of money. And it needed, and I think still needs, quite a big shake-up and kind of reform.
So track us through from setting up, writing your article, engaging Michael Gove. We launched Frontline. What were the challenges? What were you trying to do with it? How big did you want it to get? Talk us through the journey you went on as the founder and then CEO.
Yeah, so I was involved full on with Frontline as a project for a decade, and I was the chief executive for 8 years, having left the teaching profession to set it up. And it grew from me and a couple of other people sat in a corner room in someone else's office with a tiny amount of money, through to a team of 120 full-time staff. At the point I left, we brought 2,000 new people into the children's social care system. And that was starting from a position where I had the graduate recruitment market tell me there is no way you will ever get anyone interested in being a social worker. Not going to happen. We very early on were able to kind of capture the imagination of graduates and career changers who hadn't thought about social work as an option, simply by describing what the job involved. So this was about working with the courts, with police, building a relationship with families that are right on the edge of society where transformation could happen, but only with real perseverance and skill. And if you could learn to do that in that setting, make change happen, like what an amazing set of skills that you could take on.
Social workers are the most incredible people in the universe. Like they have to be a therapist, a parent, a judge, a head teacher, all in one.
Yeah.
And, the amount of support they get and the status they hold in society, I think that's changed a little bit since the last 10 years with Frontline and other things.
Yeah.
That their status has grown. But still, people don't really appreciate how impossible a job it really is. So talk a bit more about how you managed to engage graduates. They're looking at other options or to teach first or other things. What was it that caught them in?
So the issue that social work had is that it's like quite a nebulous idea and name for a profession. So a lot of people don't know what it involves. So instead we kind of led with describing what the job involved, made a big deal out of the brand of Frontline. It was about getting people right to the front line of public service, exposing them to dealing with and handling all these complex issues. And with that opens up doors and future career opportunities for them, whether that be in social work or something else. So that was the kind of big pitch. And I would describe the early days as being trying to mark out the things we were trying to disrupt in the system. So that was the view and image of social work as a career choice, how and what social workers should learn in order to be effective, and what our expectations should be of social workers once they're qualified. And on those 3 tests early on, we were very assertive as an organisation. This was partly my kind of doing in setting out what we hope to achieve and going into an existing system and disrupting it. So we had lots of kickback and challenge from the social work academic community, who were very vehemently opposed in many courses to Frontline being set up. There was kind of nervousness and anxiety from some of the system leaders because they were thinking, you can't train to be a social worker in 5 weeks, which was never the plan. But people were quite effective at making it out that was the plan. And then we had a lot of skepticism in the graduate recruitment market. So it was about setting up an initial team in those early days, very much kind of startup mode, which is, and this is one of the things I learned through that 8-year journey of, once you hire the initial founding team, you've got people who will work, incredibly hard in roles that just constantly change because you're growing an organization and getting ramped up with very little process, take a lot of responsibility, burn the candle at both ends, and are excited about that end goal that you're trying to get to, whether it's the first cohort you're trying to recruit or the first summer institute you're trying to launch, or getting the program approved through the regulator, or trying to reach a fundraising milestone. And I think the thing that I found probably hardest about the whole journey of Frontline was like all of that was extremely challenging, but it was the point at which you go from pushing through those initial barriers for the first time and then moving out of startup phase,
scale up,
and scaling without losing the kind of the magic source of what it was that got you off the ground. And I think founders find this a really tough transition.
What was the moment where you felt, do you know what, this is working?
Where it's working?
Yeah, this is happening.
Yeah, I never had that experience. Okay. I had lots of moments of like, this is great. Okay, we now need to sort this thing out. But I never really, I'd have friends or people that I'd worked with for a long time, like come into the office and go, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, it is really cool. Let's get on with the thing we're trying to get on with.
Well, maybe ask the question another way. Tell us about a time when you were so proud of something that somebody on the program achieved, or that you had some feedback that, bring to life the impact of the program for us.
Yeah. So, a couple of years ago, after leaving Frontline, worked through the review with this great organisation called New Beginnings in Stockport in Manchester, and they work with parents who've had kids removed, provide a lot of support to those parents and hopefully sort of help them, if they can, have their children come back and successfully raise their family. And the woman who set that up is an incredible entrepreneur and social worker. And she was very critical of Frontline when we were setting up Frontline. And I hope I'm not betraying her trust, but she basically said to me, look, I was very skeptical of it, but she became an external examiner for the Frontline course. And she was really impressed at the quality of work that graduates from the program were doing. And I think it was when people who were skeptical of it actually met people who were on the program, saw the work they were doing with children and families, and recognized that it was part of a kind of common effort to improve the quality of help that families and children get. That was always really rewarding. I've had a few experiences of meeting young people who've left care who've had Frontline qualified social workers. Had a director of children's services messaged me when it was really tough building Frontline. She messaged me to say, I've just left the office really late and one of your trainees is like burning the midnight oil making this amazing life story book for this kid.
Wow.
You should be really proud. So like few like very powerful moments like that where it's like, yeah, this is why we're doing this.
So Josh, I'm really interested in your getting your fingers and your arms really dirty building an organisation, and then you step into doing a review for the government, which sounds like a totally different change of gear.
Yeah.
Can you share with us the intent of the review and bring that to life for our listeners?
Yeah, so the government, the last government in 2019, in their manifesto, had made a commitment to do a big review of the care system for children. Then COVID came along and they took a bit longer to set it up than I think they'd planned. But by the end of 2020, start of 2021, they knew that they wanted to review the children's social care system. Ministers wanted someone who knew the system but wasn't of the system, so someone who had a bit of kind of distance and ability to challenge some of the orthodoxy or thinking in the sector. And I was asked to do it. Hadn't obviously done a review before, and most reviewers are at the other end of their career. So I think I was probably the first millennial to do a government commissioned review.
Powered by avocado toast, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to kind of approach it in a slightly different way, but I got a lot of advice from other reviewers. So I spent quite a lot of time at the beginning kind of speaking to people that had done big government commissioned reviews and wanted to find a way of engaging a lot of folk who had direct experience of the care system and of child protection services, the people that run the system as well. I only had about 15 months to run the review. Were
you still working
really,
at Frontline? You sort of moved on?
No, I left completely left and did it full time. And I had a really great team of civil servants working on it, but I didn't want the process to feel like a normal government department process of like submissions and policy papers and stuff taking too long. So the way we set the team up was quite different. We had like people would write stuff from the get-go. So the review started writing content straight away. We had team meetings. We used like Google Docs so that people had to just write down what they thought, and then we could argue and dispute that rather than write loads of options that never got into the detail and never kind of exposed the differences of opinion. And so we worked at pace. I made a conscious decision that I wanted to use the process of the review in order to kind of shift some discussions that were happening in the sector and more widely. So we published stuff throughout the review process. We sought feedback on it as we were going and then published the feedback we'd had, and then we'd respond to that. So we didn't do this thing of kind of going into a bunker, coming back up for air at the end of it, and then just giving everyone the answer. Which I think slightly drove the team I worked with mad at the time, but I'd hope to think that they kind of thought that itself had a bit of a value. And I think it worked well for people that wanted the review to kind of be a process as well as a final report. But I did it, so in answer to your question, I did that work because I'd worked at Frontline at that point for 8 years full time. I'd been involved in setting it up over a decade. And part of that had meant working with local authorities all across England on a specific issue of how do we get more great people, more talent into this system. But that was never the only issue that was present in children's social care. It was always a wider set of problems. So the review was a chance to articulate those wider challenges and try and get the government to make some broader changes, which I think we managed to do.
And talk us through some of those areas of impact, Josh. What did you want to see happen? Where are we? And what's next to do?
I wanted the government to have a plan, a big comprehensive plan for how to reform children's social care that was able to answer like the big questions about, why is it social workers spend so much time on bureaucracy? Why is it outcomes are so poor for kids in care? Why the number of child protection investigations we're doing going up and at record levels? Why are we spending more money on crisis intervention and less money helping families earlier on? And I wanted that answer to be kind of comprehensive for all of that stuff, and that could give organising ideas about what would need to happen, so that we're not just doing like random bits and pieces here and there. That plan needed costings, and it needed a timeline, and it needed to be clear whether there would be changes in legislation as a result of it. And so the review was written in a way to publish those answers in detail. That meant, as well as publishing a big final report, we also published loads of annexes that went through the guts of like how the money would work and when things should be implemented. So we gave government like a really good comprehensive answer. But in 2023, they responded by saying, this is the new government policy for children's social care, which was essentially implementing the review, with £200 million of new spending over 2 years, which wasn't enough, but was some money to get started with. The new government, the Labour government, which partly I got elected with in 2024, has accelerated those changes. So it's accepted and is going in exactly the same direction, which is great. Great for the system because it knows what it's doing. And they've introduced within the first 6 months legislation to implement some of those changes and put greater funding in to implement some of those changes. And I still speak to people that work in children's social care pretty regularly, and like I hear from them, you know, some of the things that have happened as a result of the review and that are happening now. I mean, there's a small thing I put it on social media last week. There was this practice of kids who are in care needing to make themselves intentionally homeless in order to get appropriate accommodation. So they'd have to say, they'd get given a really crappy flat or something by their council, and they'd have to say, no, I can't live there. That's not suitable for me. And it's like really far from where I'm working or studying at college. The practice in many places was that young care leaver in the care of the council would need to declare themselves homeless in order to get appropriate accommodation. I recommended that we get rid of that. It's quite a narrow recommendation. I made 80 of them, but the new government has made an amendment to the Child Wellbeing Bill to make that a reality. So there are loads of examples where the system's getting smarter and better at backing those kids and the relationships that matter for them growing up.
Josh, from the review, you move forward and now you are the newly elected MP, I believe, for Whitehaven and Workington, which is amazing. Before we get into the policy level discussions, I'm keen to understand what it's been like as a first-time MP. Can you talk us through the first time that you walked through the House of Commons chamber and just those early experiences as a new MP?
Yeah, it's incredibly daunting. Like standing in the House of Commons chamber for the first time as an MP, standing up, asking a question or doing your maiden speech, you're like there's so much history that comes with that place that it takes a lot to get used to it. And the only other time that I'd been in the House of Commons chamber before being elected was to take a group of kids as a teacher to Parliament to have a look around. And that was quite a long time before the election. So I'd obviously done quite a lot of work with government, but I'd not done much work with Parliament before. So it takes a lot to get used to it. And it's a sort of curious combination. The job is a curious combination of stuff that is hugely freeing. You know, you can pick the issues that you want to focus on almost kind of without exclusion. And yet there are bits of the role which are like being back at school, like, you know, the division bell, there's some of the rules of how the place works are pretty archaic. And so that's getting used to the stuff that is out of your control, like the rhythm of the day and the stuff that you need to do, and the things which are very much in your control and you actually need to be kind of quite quick at getting on the case with, which is like, what are the top issues you're going to focus on? What are the issues for your constituents? That's been an adjustment.
Other than sort of children's social care, what's been an issue which you've spoken about or voted on at Parliament that has given you the most, I guess, inspiration or moment to worry, I guess, being in that area of responsibility?
So I've done quite a lot of stuff linked to children's social care. I was lucky enough to get a private members bill slot. So I've been doing a lot of campaigning on how children are using social media and smartphones, which has just been this massive shift in how childhood is experienced for kids. And I think will probably be an issue that we look back in 10 years' time and think, like, what on earth were we thinking? We should have had some kind of tighter, better collective rules around some of this stuff. And I'm confident we'll get there. But that's been an issue which I've kind of got stuck into very early on. And then very different to the kind of my professional background, but which is a huge issue for my constituency and the country, is energy policy, the availability of clean, reliable energy, and specifically Britain's ability to build nuclear power plants. My constituency was the first place in the world where we had a civil nuclear power plant operational in the 1950s. Incredible amount of industrial pride and technological pride there in that endeavour. Yet we've massively lost our way as a country in being able to do those big things quickly. And nuclear is a very timely energy area, partly because of the energy demands that we've got, the need for energy security to make sure we're not linked to Russian fossil fuels and also petrostates. And it's also really important for the AI revolution, some of the very energy intensive industries that are coming down the tracks. We used to lead in this thing, and we've kind of lost our way. So that's like a very exciting and different policy area which I've got stuck into.
So just small topics, Josh.
Yeah.
On the first point you made about children's welfare and sort of social media, as a parent of two small children, the further we can go, the better, because I'm truly terrified about that conversation with my daughter, who's currently 5, when her friends start getting smartphones. And we are, I think, as you say, in desperate need of changes to be made there. So really sort of all the power to you to make that happen, and to have all of our thanks. You're going to have people in the playground coming up to you, Joshua, saying thank you.
I get so many messages from young parents. It's interesting. Parents who've got older teenage kids, I think they're not as animated about this issue generally. Their kids have kind of been through that process. There are now parents of kids who are 11, 12, 13, who are really struggling with this. And parents of younger kids who can see the direction that these platforms are going in and are really, really worried. So it's this issue is not going anywhere. It's only going to become more prominent.
So over the life of this Parliament, Josh, clearly you can get involved and spread yourself very broadly across multiple issues. But where do you want to see your impact greatest when you look back at the end of this Parliament, in the way that you look back at your Frontline experience and your children's review experience? Where do you want to be, and what are you going to be satisfied with?
I want to be able to point at a couple of issues where my contribution has made a decisive difference. So, that would include issues to do with children in care and children's social care reform. It would be on nuclear policy, and specifically my constituency, and having more opportunities for young people growing up in West Cumbria to have great jobs and some pride around some new things that we're doing, as well as the history of the area. And that's massively important for tackling populism. And so it's a sort of democratic as well as an economic imperative that local political leaders from the centre left are able to kind of show that they can deliver on that. So that's very, very important for me. And then, there are other issues which I can use the platform that I've got at the moment to advance issues. We've not spoken about it, but I'm a volunteer in a mountain rescue team. And across the UK, there's huge numbers of people that are involved in volunteer search and rescue services, whether that's the RNLI or mountain rescue teams or Coast Guard teams. And there are some fairly micro issues to do with insurance, helicopters, which wouldn't take a huge amount to sort out, but a bit of an intervention on those would make a difference. And so, just wanting to use this very special thing that I've been trusted with for 4 years, which is being the MP for the great people of Whitehaven and Workington, to kind of focus on a couple of things and make a difference.
So outside of those people, for all of our listeners in Whitehaven and beyond, how can they get involved in the things that you're doing, the campaigns you're leading? In particular, thinking about the children's social care piece, like if people maybe learning about this for the first time, listening to you, where can they go to sort of try and contribute?
Well, the great thing about children's social care as an issue is if we leave this to the government to fix, it won't get fixed. Like, this is a problem of collective compassion and love for kids in our country. And so there are so many things people can do. There are amazing organisations recruiting and supporting foster carers, adopters. There's really great models of how to provide ongoing like mentoring for care leavers, for parents that are struggling. And if, you know, that one of the stats that I used during the review, because it was right at the time of the Ukraine war really starting, and the UK government's response to the Ukraine war, which, to give the last government credit on the Homes for Ukraine scheme, I think was very good. We went from having no programme for Ukrainian families to having 100,000 Ukrainians come over living in people's homes within a year. Like, we were able to do that, which is amazing. We can't even approve 2,000 new foster carers a year as a country. So like, if we got that to 10,000 a year, that would be a complete game changer for children in care growing up in this country. It would mean more kids entering the care system, growing up with their brother and sister, living closer to the school that they attend so they don't need to change school, as well as have all that disruption elsewhere in their life, have a match with a family who are better able to meet their needs, all kinds of positive benefits. So, you know, if we can like have a bit more of a national spirit around some of those things, we'd make a huge step forward. And it is one of these issues, right, where I speak to people a lot of time about children's social care, where they say, oh, it's very difficult. How do you sort these things out? You know, parents who are abusive or issues around domestic abuse, it's all kind of bleak. And of course, you know, there is a reality that this system is dealing with some of the darkest, most kind of painful and difficult bits of society and how we respond as a country. But also, like, it has got the most amazing people kind of coming forward and playing their part in it. And it's so solvable. It's so solvable. And I get excited talking about the solutions to it. And I know there are a lot of other people too. So I would encourage people to don't get involved with anything I'm doing. Like, get involved in sorting out this issue in your community. And there's loads of ways you can do that.
Final question. The theme of this conversation has really been people, right? People in your personal life, people you've enabled through the social care system, and now the people you're working with in Parliament. Who is your political hero? We talked about some of your personal heroes. Who's your political hero?
Someone whose speeches I find amazing, Bobby Kennedy. And I can feel the eye rolling of Brits that I've picked an American. But Bobby Kennedy, his ability to read the emotions of people when making remarks at times of like huge national significance, I find just like really inspiring. Like, when Martin Luther King had been assassinated, his ability to lead people who were just angry about that and understandably wanting to riot, to kind of channel a different emotional response for people. It's an amazing speech. I'd encourage people to listen to it. And it was spontaneous.
Wow.
I admire political leaders who know their mind, are prepared to make an argument, even if there'll be people that disagree with it, and are effective at making things happen. So I look at Bobby Kennedy's speeches for a decent bit of inspiration. And then there are actually some amazing people in the new cohort of Labour MPs, people that have had like remarkable careers before they came here. The other Bobby Kennedy speech, like, it's like properly geeky thing, this, but he gave a speech as Attorney General to the Conference of American Mayors, and he was basically saying, like, you need to be at the forefront of like delivering change in the country. It's not down to someone else. And there's a turn of phrase he uses in that speech, which I think is also a really, I think about a lot, which is progress is the nice word, but change is its motivator, and change has its enemies. And I think like that's like the ability to go from like talking generally about progress to being really clear about what it is that needs to change to make that happen. And then to recognizing that there will be people who stand to lose potentially from that change, and that it's not always a smooth or easy journey. Like that is that one phrase captures a lot of what politics should be about.
Incredible.
What a great place to end. Josh, thank you so much for your time. If I was in the constituency of Whitehaven and Workington, you might just have persuaded me to vote for you in the next election.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've not got that amount of time for everybody. So hopefully it will be a guaranteed vote.
No problem. Plenty of listeners will go up there and campaign on your behalf when the time comes, Josh.
Yeah, always welcome.
Josh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Cheers, guys.
Adam, Josh MacAlister, what a hero. What are your responses?
Well, I first met Josh in Nestor's offices when starting out Beyond Me, and Josh was starting Frontline. So I'd like to consider him somewhat of a peer, but that comparison ends there, given all the things he's achieved.
Not at all.
Since then. For me, I think you captured it right, Rafi, which is it's about people. It's about the impact we make on people's lives. And what I think Josh does really nicely is to address the macro picture, but then look at the micro, look at the interactions, the day-to-day relationships, the day-to-day moments that matter. And I think that matters so much, because often people talk about change in the world, but they forget that actually real change begins internally with oneself, and then in the relationships and communities that surrounds you. So that really, really, really struck me as powerful. And also, like, having built social enterprises myself, I know how hard it is and how lonely it can be. And the achievement of going from, zero to putting 2,000 social workers through Frontline is unprecedented.
And it's inspired others. There's like Frontlines for the prison guards and all this kind of stuff for startups. I think one of the things that Josh didn't talk about, which I know from when we met, but as he mentioned back in the DFE, is that they didn't want him to lead Frontline. When he came up with this idea and he promoted himself as the person to run it, they tried to push him out. And he had to work really hard to make the case that even though he didn't have experience of building a social enterprise or a business, even though he'd just come up with this idea, he was the guy to lead it. He was the guy to run it, and he had to really fight for that opportunity. And how good is that? How brilliant that he was able to do that and that he did, because he's a real shining light of what it means to be a leader. You see a problem, you have an idea, and you go out and make it happen. I think that's really been a theme of the conversations we've had on this podcast, the people that we're trying to talk to, leaders who dare to transform our world, people who dare to say, yes, there's a problem, and no one else is in a better place than me to fix it. I've got to be there. I've got to get up and start on fixing it. All the way from Tony Hawk's and the tennis, all the way through to Josh. And he's just the most, huge role model. He comes across as a really authentic and warm person as well. I think that's quite rare and often in politics. That doesn't, a bit like Mete, who we spoke to a few weeks ago. He's got a smooth way of operating, and he's eloquent and he's clear, but he's not greasy. He's not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. He's telling you how it is. It's evidence-based, it's authentic, it's real. And that's what we need, leaders in our society. And really, it's incredible that we have people like him in Parliament. So I'm sure he'll go far. We'll see, what happens with this government and political sphere today, but got full faith in Josh going pretty far.
Yeah, me too. And Rafi, I hope you weren't one of those people at the DFE trying to persuade Josh that somebody else might have been better.
Quite the opposite.
That doesn't strike me that's something that you would have gone along with, Rafi. Again, I think you put it perfectly there, which is people that hold themselves accountable for solving a problem and get stuck right in. And that's been a feature of this podcast, and why it's such a privilege to chat to people like Josh with you, Rafi.
And you. Until next time on the Impact Equation.
Until next time.